Hello, my name is Saito Cash. I'm back again with another Ableton tutorial. I don't know if anyone's actually talked about this too much, but when I was looking up like exactly what the filters on the Ableton Compressor do, I didn't get much. I had found one video, but it kind of went over it briefly, and I think this should be talked about a little bit more in depth for a lot of people new to Ableton, looking to get something like a dynamic EQ as a third-party plugin when you can actually kind of make something like a pseudo one-banded dynamic EQ in Ableton already, or a de-esser, for example. So I want to get into this. First of all, let's find. This is perfect. Okay, let's find a drum track, and I've also got a vocal track. This will be good to show off what I'm talking about. Okay, so the Ableton compressor, pretty good average compressor. Now, one thing about compression, when it comes to mastering or mixing on the mix bus, EDM and hip hop, is that when you have all the elements together, that includes the drums, and your spectrum kind of looks like this. You got your first fundamental, second fundamental frequency, and then so on. When you want to do glue compression to compress everything together, to get it all to kind of squish more, so that you can bring it up in level higher, because the highest peak is lower. You can bring up the total volume, and you do your compression with these big booming kicks and 808s. When you put the threshold of a compressor on here, it's going to get triggered by the highest fundamental frequency, or the sub, and you're going to hear this pumping effect every single time this thing comes up, if you're working on EDM, for example. So let's put the compressor on the drum track. And a way that you can deal with that is multi-band compression, but you can also do this with one-banded compressors, or the glue compressor in Ableton. So we're on peak mode. We have an attack of 1 millisecond and ratio 4, and I'm just going to compress this as is, and you're going to get this sort of pumping effect. You're kind of hearing like the whole signal coming down. There's a little bit of a click. That's from the top transient of that kick on the higher end of the spectrum, but the sub of the kick is affecting it. And just to emphasize this more, if I turn down the attack to make the compressor attack that sound right away instead of waiting a millisecond, then compress, this is what it sounds like. You want to avoid this when you're mastering. You do not want the sonics of your song or your track to be pumping up and down every time the kick hits. That's for something like side chaining, for example. You do not want this in the total mix. So how do you deal with that? High pass filtering, side chaining, or keying, as they call it. And what this means is that you're feeding the compressor only a certain amount of the frequency information that you want to compress, not the entire frequency spectrum in general. So when you open up the sidechain preference, you do not have to turn on external sidechain, where you have a kick activating the compression for a bass guitar. You can keep this off. This is internal sidechaining. This is on the same track. You have this EQ thing, and if you don't know what this does is it takes the incoming signal, filters it, and then feeds that filter information to the compressor. You're not going to hear the sound being filtered, but this is what the compressor's hearing. So, for example, right now there's a high pass filter going on, and it's currently at 80 hertz. If I turn this up, that pumping effect, I'm going to turn down the attack again. The pumping effect is not going to be as apparent in the bass. It's only going to be more on the top end, because we're leaving that bass kick alone. And I'm going to show you what it looks like on like a paper. So as you can see, the hi-hats are they're more controlled, but the bass drum is still there. Of course, I don't have the makeup gain up all the way, or to level it out so you can actually hear what the compressor's doing. I'll try to get that real quick. That sub information in the kick still stays there. Okay, so this is what this is doing. Instead of this threshold here, right, when we activate the EQ for the internal sidechaining, what you're actually seeing is this. This would be at the 1041 hertz mark right here. I mean, this is probably like 80 or something. It's gonna be up here, but this is what the compressor's feeling. So anything higher at this spectrum is gonna activate the compressor, not this low end bit. That's very important. So with that concept in mind, I also want to show you what it looks like with the filtering and the spectrum. So right now we're using only the bandpass filter EQ for the compressor, and we're going to use a vocal for this.
I walk with my ancestors, I talk with their hearts, I sing with their souls, I love with...
So basically, I've mapped the frequency and the resonance knobs to an EQ, so you can kind of see what's happening, which is why I have to use the macros here instead of the actual controls on the compressor. But in this band pass filter mode, what you're doing is, instead of doing like a whole high pass filter bit here, we're actually only having the compressor listen to a specific band, and you can move this band up and down. You can make a de-esser with this basically. So let's say I want to get rid of some of the S's and T's on this vocal. Let's try to find a spot.
Eu ando como sente paz the way I walk with my ancestors.
Okay, so there's some S's and T's. Let's take off this threshold real quick. And you can listen into what the filter is doing with this headphone thing.
Ancestors, I talk.
Okay, so we're almost there. We're trying to look for that resonance.
Ancestors, I talk with their hearts, I sing with their souls, I love.
So it's not exactly the S's and T's, but that's a resonant frequency that's going to be kind of abrasive to the ears as we compress and get everything louder in the track with the vocal. So when I compress this, you're going to hear compression only on that band.
Ancestors, I talk with their hearts, I sing with their souls, I love with the Great Spirit leading.
Let me try to get the output a little bit closer to the original.
Ancestors, I talk with their hearts, I sing with...
There's a little bit more of a ah and s coming out of that vocal without the compressor, but with it on.
Ancestors, ancestors.
It's controlled.
Ancestors.
There's a little bit more of that resonant frequency popping up and down. So this is basically a de-esser, or a dynamic EQ, if you want, because every time it hits a certain portion of the frequency that you don't like, it's going to compress it, and only that frequency, not the whole band. Now I want to go over what each of these filter types actually do, because the top row here is actually different from the bottom row. So the top row consists of filters that'll increase or decrease the volume of the filter that you're using. So the first one is a low shelf. So what you can do with this is you can emphasize low end to have the compressor only attack the lower end of a frequency. You can also turn down this band so that instead it actually goes down here. Let's see if I can get rid of that. So that it's kind of like that high pass filter one from earlier, but a little bit more. It tunes into the bass a little bit, so it still factors it in. On the other side of that spectrum, we have the higher filter, and a good example when you can use this is if you have reverb on a return track and you want more of that high end on the reverb to be more controlled. What you can do, you can emphasize it with the compressor, and it'll compress more and more of that high end to keep it tighter, and then you turn down the whole signal, and that high end is still going to be very present but controlled compared to everything else on that return track. Of course, you can also turn this down if you want. Nothing to that. We have a band here. This can be used as a to emphasize certain frequencies, or to be more of like a notch filter. So I don't want to compress this middle bit. You can do that. And as you change them, you can see there's the gain and just the frequency knob. They don't actually have a resonance peak, so that's something that you're just gonna have to, you know, figure out. If I set this up with the EQ, I'm gonna just set it back in real quick. Put this back on peak. If I'm doing something like the low pass filter, I can group these two tracks and map this out. So I want to map out the frequent. Oh shoot, hold up. Let me change this mode to here. Let me change the filter type to. I'll map the frequencies to here. Now the frequency maximum on the EQ is different compared to the EQ filtering on the compressor, so we're gonna have to make up for that. And then we're gonna take the gain and then also map this gain, and then these should be about the same for both. So I'm also gonna turn off the EQ because I just only want this to show what it does. So this is your high pass filter. This is what we're EQing.
Ancestors, I talk with their hearts, I sing with their souls, I love with the great spirit leading.
This is what the compressor is listening to when it's going to compress. So when I do this, it's emphasizing the low end.
Ancestors, I talk with their hearts, I sing with their souls, I love with the great spirit.
So now it sounds kind of squashed. The high end is mostly untouched. So that's what that looks like. These bottom filters, what these are going to do, these are going to become, instead of shelves or just regular bands, these are just going to be high pass, low pass, and these will actually respond instead of with gain, with a resonance peak. So you can do passes like that, or you can do high passes like that and emphasize the bottom frequency. And then the one that's my favorite on here by far is the single band that only listens to certain parts, and you can just go back and forth with that however you want, listen to certain frequencies. It's a very useful tool. So yeah, that is just kind of my little spiel on what the frequency types do on the EQ section of the compressor in Ableton. So yeah, thank you for watching. My name is Sato Cash, and I'm signing out.